We've got the exercise plan. We've got the diet plan, the career plan, the family plan. We've got the anti-aging plan. I know I got that one going on. We got a lot of plans, don't we? But where did we input the plan to take care of our brains? I don't remember that plan. Do you? So studies show that about 4% of people actually stick to their New Year's resolutions. What on earth does that say about what the rest of us 96%ers are doing? Welcome to the Raw Onion, everyone. And again, Happy New Year. We're on episode 6 and episode 2 in our realignment over resolutions. And listen, folks, we all want to start the year strong, right? And we all want to make our big resolutions. And last week we were talking about boundaries, and now we're talking about what really does stand in our way when we're looking to realign over being resolute. And if we're talking about resolutions, lasting change is not a motivation problem. It's an identity prediction problem. I'll say that again. Lasting change, those resolutions that we want to make, it is not a motivation problem. It is not a willpower problem. It is an identity prediction problem. And so, again, no shade to the other fellow podcasters out here, but you're going to hear a lot this year, and right now especially, on a lot of different platforms to just say, hey guys, try harder, push through, you got to get the willpower. But the thing is, here at the Raw Onion, we're trying to get us all to hear why our brains are rejecting the change in the first place. We're not here to say try harder. We're here to teach all of us, including myself, including Yoshie here, who's my amazing tech colleague behind the scenes, we want to know how to work with our brains instead. So, neuroscience shows us that the brain is just not designed for self-improvement. It's not. Our egos want to improve, but the brain is not designed for it. What our brains are really designed for is prediction, is energy conservation, and most importantly, our brains are made for survival consistency, okay? We're people and humans of pattern recognition. We want to predict the outcome. That's what our brain does, right? If something happens over and over again, our brain sees the pattern and we're going to anticipate the same thing happening. The brain requires a lot of energy, and so if change is something that the brain sees as a threat, and it's going to be too much work, it's going to take up too much energy, it's not going to want to do it. And ultimately, like we all know at this point, right, the brain is wired for safety. So even if the most logical change occurs, even if it's something that we might think is simple, like, well, not simple, I've tried for 20 years now, but, let's say for lack of a better example, losing weight, right? 20 pounds. All right, I'd love to lose 20 pounds. But if the brain thinks that there's any threat associated with that, it's going to make sure that those pounds do not come off. It's trying to keep you safe. And so when a resolution threatens the identity coherence in that brain, the brain's going to flag it as a risk, not growth. So unfortunately, guys, resolutions, they're a scam. We've been played. If New Year's resolutions did work, gyms wouldn't turn into ghost towns by February. You know this. Most people don't fail resolutions. They return to identity defaults. We return to our old patterns because they're safe. Your brain will always protect who you think you are, even if that version of you is exhausted. So the brain is always going to prioritize predictability over happiness. And, while we talk about ways we can encourage change, ways we can realign over this need to have a resolution, what we really need to understand is it's the identity shift that starts it all. And this is really why today's episode is actually really important to me. And it really speaks to a lot of what I've gone through in the last decade. And those are stories for another day. I'll be happy to share them. And I think all of you listening will find rapport with what I will share. But, for the last 10 years, there were bouts of incredible burnout, to the point where I got hospitalized, believe it or not, from absolute burnout. And that was a blessing in disguise because it really brought me into my career now, and I'm very thankful for it. But what I want to share with you, and the reason I'm sharing why this is so important, is because after over a decade of really studying what happens to us when we are incredibly stressed, the core and the foundation and the cornerstone that I kept coming back to before anything, before the affirmations, before the dark night of the soul, before all of it, it's the identity shift. The identity has to shift. You have to really imagine with every core cell of your body who you want to be. Not who somebody tells you to be, not how you've been raised to be, or conditioned to be, not what the patterns of your experiences have taught your brain to predict. No, it has to come back to who do you want to show up in the world as? That's it. That is it. Who do you want to show up as? And not just that. And again, maybe that sounds oversimplified, but it's not. This is ongoing work. It's a process. It will last a lifetime because it's the question you have to re-engage with every day. Who am I going to show up as? And your brain doesn't want a new you. That's where you're going to have this little internal battle. It wants familiarity with snacks. Let's just put it that way, right? It wants the familiar with a little bit of novelty to shake things up, but it doesn't want you to change. And so our job really is to say, hey, brain, we're safe enough to make this choice for ourselves now. Your brain would rather keep you familiar and miserable than unfamiliar and free. And that is why it has to be a conscious choice every day to ask yourself, what is this identity that I am shifting into? And resolutions don't stick because reframing failure as biology is not willpower, okay? The brain is a prediction machine, and that's what we had talked about earlier. It's always asking, what would I normally do here? Okay? That's your old identity. It's stored prediction patterns. That's all it is. It's not you sort of misaligning or sabotaging your core self. No. The identity of who you've been all of these years is just stored prediction patterns. So to choose otherwise for yourself is to just re-engage with the patterns in a new way. So there's a part of our brains, it's called the basal ganglia, and that really hones in on our habit loops. And this is where habits live, your automatic habits and your energy-saving system habits. And your resolutions, that sort of idea and drive of I want to lose 20 pounds, I'm going to work out, I'm going to get healthy, those kind of decision-making applications, they live in your prefrontal cortex. That's at the very front of your brain. That's where you put effort in. That's where all of your limitations come online to say, should I not? And willpower in both basal ganglia and your prefrontal cortex, when that willpower kicks in to say, hey, yes, I'm going to push through, nothing's going to stop me, January 1st, I've got this, guess what? That is metabolically very expensive. Ka-ching! I want to do something new, and you are going to pay for it. Because identity-based behaviors feel cheap to the brain. Why? Here we go. Brain wants to feel safe. New is unfamiliar equals potentially unsafe. That's the identity you've got to override. And so identity is stored as energy expectation. To think of doing something new requires a lot. And, the funny thing is, identity is encoded through your neural firing patterns, your metabolic efficiency. And if change feels foreign, if it feels uncomfortable, that's because your brain requires more glucose to make it happen. It requires more sugar, more energy, because it means that it needs to focus more. There's more uncertainty. So the brain needs to use more energy to see if what you're trying to do with this new resolution is safe or not. That's why burnout makes change nearly impossible unless identity shifts first. Because if your identity says, I'm the kind of person who burns out, your brain will quietly sabotage anything that threatens that storyline. So the new year, new morning routine, I got this, that's going to collapse after one bad night's sleep. Because now you've been sucked dry of energy. Identity shifting is what's going to keep you showing up every day because you're deciding who you want to be. Identity is the hidden operating system, making identity tangible and slightly uncomfortable, but in a good way, right? Just to push you enough so you're standing on that cliff's edge, but you still feel safe. And your brain, it doesn't ask, is this good for me? Your brain asks, is this me? Okay, I'm going to repeat that one more time. Your brain will never ask you with a new behavior you're trying out, is this good for me? It's going to stop and ask you, is this me? So burnout as an identity role that I'm the reliable one, I push through, that's what you're identifying as. And so some of us aren't even addicted to productivity. We're addicted to being needed. We're addicted to those old identities. So what we're looking for really is, again, realignment over resolution, right? Behavior, what you do. That's probably the least effective place to start. And beliefs. What if you believe that this is possible? Well, again, it depends on how you're really thinking through that. If you're thinking, if I rest, I'll fall behind, or if you're thinking success requires suffering, that's your identity. You're stamping that as approved and sending it out to the world, whether it's true or not. So if you invert that, and if you kind of say, wait a minute, instead of saying success requires suffering, I'm just going to martyr myself and push through. If that's your old identity, well, think of it this way. What if you said, I am someone who ... This is where the change starts to stick. Ding! You don't rise to the level of your goals. You fall back to the level of your identity. So, who would you have to stop being for your resolution to work? That's the key question here, guys. All of the things that you've been doing, behaviors, actions, all of those things you have to stop. And instead of having one goal this year to say, I'm going to have this resolution, you have to begin with the realignment of asking yourself, who would you have to stop being for your resolution to work? And this is the missing step that nobody talks about. Identity has to come first, behavior second. You have to make the choice of who you're going to show up as before you can enact the behavior of that person. It makes sense, doesn't it? So here's the sequence that actually works. Number 1, identity realignment, right? We're realigning over resolution. That's Raw Onion's theme. Who must I be for this to feel normal? Identity realignment. Who must I be? Not who do I want to be, not what quality do I want to have, not what behavior I'm going to make sure I put out into the world. It's who must I be for this to feel normal? Number 2, nervous system safety. Does this feel safe enough to repeat? So your micro movements, when you're shifting your identity, it has to be small, mindful, doable action steps. that feel safe enough to repeat. Remember, we are a bunch of repetitive patterns. That is what we are. We have to change the patterns if we're going to change the identity. And those patterns have to feel safe enough to repeat. And then you really come into those micro behaviors because they're safe enough to repeat. Actions small enough to confirm this identity, not threaten it. And then you start to reinforce those new tiny behaviors because emotional plus physiological proof, not just outcomes. That is where we want to be. This is why resolutions collapse by February, and this is why realignment works. So how identity shifts actually begin? I mean, where do we start? Because you have to think about it, right? If you want to act different, you have to become different. And that's a lot of what we talk about when Yoshie and I talk about perfectionism, crossroads in life, these big decisions, right? Let's say empty nesters, if your kids are going off to college, you're really forced with the crossroads of an identity shift. Who am I now that I'm not needed every day as a parent or a guardian? Who am I now? And that really has to come from envisioning that ideal version of yourself. Empower without overwhelm. Neuroscience-backed principles really come from evidence-based brain reaction. What is the brain doing? It needs small, repeated proof so your dopamine reinforces consistency, not intensity. We don't want to shock ourselves. It's no ice bath moment here, guys, all right? This is being safe enough to dip into a nice, warm bubble bath. I'll use that analogy where you can really let yourself drift away and imagine your ideal self. How do you walk? How do you carry yourself? What do you look like? And that doesn't mean that aesthetics are everything, but we all have our ideal version of what we would love to look like. How do I move through the world? What do I love to eat? And this is me personally, something that actually helped me, and it sounds a little weird, but I love fresh cut flowers. That's something that I have committed to putting in my office every week because this version of me, who's a professional, who's an entrepreneur, who's a business owner, who's a strong, empowered female, it wasn't always like that. This took years of really uncomfortable shadow work. But I now, stepping into my femininity, that's something that brings me joy. To be able to smell beautiful, my favorite is stargazer lilies. I love them and I love to have them. And that sets me up in this identity that I've created for myself. I also went and got myself a vibration plate. One of those things, again, it sounds trendy, but every morning I step on there for 20 minutes. I shake out the night and I give myself those 20 minutes to say, okay, what do I have going for me today? How am I stepping into the day? Because it's up to me. I take that time to ground myself in my identity that I build for myself, not what the world is going to tell me to be, because that might get me 30 different imprints every day. Everybody I'm going to meet is going to have a different version of me. And imagine how psychotic that would make any of us. If I'm only the mirror to everybody else I'm running into in the day, I'm going to be a headless chicken trying to be that version for everybody of what they expect. I didn't do anything for myself. Who am I? Well, it's already lost if I'm trying to dip into what everybody else wants. Take the time and figure out who you are, who you want to be. Breathe, rest, find predictability in yourself. And your identity swap question, you could always ask yourself, if this behavior were already true about me, what would it say about who I am? Let's say, for example, I work out. Well, I'm framing that as I am someone who protects my energy. Or I speak up. Well, that version of me is I am someone whose voice belongs in the room. And I rest. Well, I'm someone who does not earn worth through exhaustion. So name the identity first and then choose one action that confirms it. All right? And we've got a lot of different NLP hacks here and different identity shifting, self-concept shifting, incredible work-throughs that Yoshie and I are actually putting together for you as I speak. This will be available coming up in the next few weeks. And so I would love and really sincerely invite anybody who is gleaning any kind of interest in this episode of real true identity shifting. Stay tuned. We'll make an announcement when it's up for use. But absolutely, I would recommend everybody dipping their toes in and diving deep into these hacks because it's going to absolutely change your life. I'm not kidding. And they're simple. And that's the trick. You know, I'm going to give you one right now. You can walk away with it as we start to wrap up this episode for today. But identity relanguaging, that's what we like to call it. Your brain listens to your words, guys. You are what you tell yourself you are. If you're going to tell your brain that you're in a negative space, if you're going to tell your brain you're 20 pounds too big to go out there and enjoy life, if you're going to tell yourself and tell your brain that you aren't ready to step into X, Y, and Z, your brain's going to believe you. So you've got to relanguage your words. And instead of I'm trying to or I should, try shifting to I'm becoming someone who, fill in the blank. Or I'm practicing being, fill in the blank. Because this bypasses that identity threat. And that's all we're trying to do, guys. If you're trying to step into a new career, it takes guts. Guts and safety. You've got to align those things. Doesn't that make sense? To say, well, if I'm going to have the courage to step out into the unknown, then I better sure as heck know all the ins and outs of what my identity is that really hones in on that version of myself that's going to go out there and kill it. All right? You've got to repattern and relanguage yourself before you're even willing, even subconsciously willing to take that risk. It has to live in safety. So I'm going to leave you with this. Identity shifting, again, it's the cornerstone of everything we will ever do in life. We've got to know who we are, and we choose who we are. So here at The Raw Onion, and when we talk about these self-concepts, it's not about fixing yourself. There's nothing to fix. It's about understanding your brain well enough to stop fighting it. And this is really about teaching why identity, not discipline, is the missing link to lasting change. And why we feel like an imposter is often proof that you are actually evolving. So if you think, wait a minute, Steph, you're asking me to go out there and be fake in the world. Nope, absolutely not. It's the opposite. When you feel like you're, is this really me? Am I really, maybe I'm just being an imposter right now. Have that be your little cue card that goes up saying you're heading in the right direction, because that's your brain getting a little scared that you're getting out of your safety zone, and that's exactly what you want. That's exactly what you want. So realignment over resolutions. We're going to continue this theme for the rest of January, but all we're saying again is, guys, plan. But take care of your brains first. Take care of your identity first. And show up making lasting change, knowing it's not a motivation problem. It's just an identity prediction problem. Okay? And we've got you covered in how to untangle all of it right here at The Raw Onion. Stay tuned for all of it. And again, thank you so much, everybody, for taking your time to listen and hopefully learn. And we will be back next week, Yoshie and I, with more from The Raw Onion. Until then, take care. Have a beautiful week. Over and out.